What exactly does the right stand for in American politics, and where does the conservative movement go in a post-Trump, post-Charlie Kirk future? Today, we've got a leading conservative voice to help us answer those questions. Get ready, it's hammer time. Good day from Newsweek headquarters at the top of the World Trade Center in New York City. This is the 1600, and I'm Carlo Versano. It's good to see everybody on this bizarre week between Christmas and New Year's, where I don't really know what this week even is, right? We called it the void in the newsletter today. Does anyone know what day it is, what time it is? Is anybody paying attention? Who knows? But we have a great guest for you today, and we're talking about the right. The newsletter column that I write is a little bit probably center left, I would say, but I'm very curious what people on the right, both sort of traditional conservatives and MAGA conservatives, have to say about the world, where they see things going, what they're happy about, what they're displeased about in 2025, which has been quite the year. I think everybody would agree. But I think our conversation today starts with the assassination of Charlie Kirk back in September. That really, I believe, left a gaping void on the right. And I said this at the time, and I think I was probably accurate in saying so. And I think we would all agree now that we probably underestimated the degree to which Kirk was sort of keeping together these various factions on the right, the so-called new right, which is what we're calling it now, I think. And he was really he was really channeling a lot of that energy towards very tangible goals, right? A goal of minting a new generation of Trump and MAGA supporters, but also just minting a new generation of card-carrying Republican voters. And as Recline famously said in the New York Times, Kirk, regardless of what you thought of Kirk, he was practicing politics in the right way, right? He was out there, he was debating, he would talk to anybody. He wasn't hiding behind a webcam in his parents' basement. He was, out there putting forth the ideas and the ideals that he believed in. So after Kirk's death in the last 3 or 4 months, we have seen this power struggle among conservatives, really trying to chart the movement's course for a post-Trump future, whenever that may be. On the one side, you have far-right figures like white nationalists and anti-Semites. I'm talking people like Nick Fuentes. You've got provocateurs like Tucker Carlson, conspiracy theorists like Candace Owens, all of them trying to, using their platforms to stake their claim to the new right. On the other hand, you've also got much more traditionally conservative voices, people like Ben Shapiro and Josh Hammer. Josh is my guest today. He is a trained lawyer and a nationally syndicated conservative columnist. He's got the conservative bona fides, if you don't know him. He was active in the Federalist and Edmund Burke Societies. He's a fellow at Claremont. He's also my colleague here at Newsweek, where he serves as our senior editor at large and host of the Josh Hammer Show, which you can watch on our YouTube page, and it's also syndicated on talk radio and through the Salem Media Group. Josh, sorry for the long intro, but welcome, man. Appreciate it.
Carlo, it's my pleasure wishing you a belated Merry Christmas and an early Happy New Year.
And to you, much appreciated. Thanks for coming on again in this void week. But at least, hey, there's two of us at least working, right? So that counts for something. So Josh, I mentioned some of these names already, Ben Shapiro, Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson. Before we get to the piece that I want to talk about that you wrote this week, where you ask, sort of this rhetorical question, what does the right stand for? Tell me a couple things. Where does J.D. Vance sort of like sit in this matrix? If you've got people like Fuentes on, the far right on one side, and you've got, Shapiro on the other end, where's Vance in there?
It's a very good question. Before I answer that, let me just
Please.
let me just say that I think that with respect, I think the dichotomy that you've set up is somewhat arbitrary. And by the way, it's not just you, Carl. I see this oftentimes in the media. A lot of folks,
Please, yeah.
a lot of folks say, "Oh, it's a national populist versus MAGA," or excuse me, it's a national populist and MAGA versus the traditional conservatives, the Reagan coalition. And I think that's a very easy framing, a very easy taxonomy that people kind of intuitively lash onto.
Yeah. It's reductive, for sure.
For sure, but I think it's actually a little more complicated than that. So, for instance, and I will get to your question about J.D. Vance, but for instance, me personally, Ben Shapiro is a very good friend of mine. I've known Ben for a very long time. I worked for the Daily Wire before working in Newsweek. Ben and I are very, very close, still very much in touch. But his politics, my politics, not exactly the same. For instance, when it comes to some issues such as economics or immigration, I mean, we're talking here of differences on the margin. But for instance, Carlo, I've been pretty active in recent years. With part of the national conservatism movement, and I've been working trying to plot an economic, a legal jurisprudential path forward for the Trump era nationalist right, because I do have many nationalist sympathies. I generally agree with the notion of America first, with the notion of MAGA. I've voted for President Trump numerous times there, and I've been a part of kind of this broader years long project trying to lay this intellectual foundation. I
Right.
think what's happened, especially since Charlie's assassination, is you've seen that there's been this effort to co-opt a lot of this substantive work many of us have done to try to lay the foundation and take in a hyper conspiratorial, at times overtly misogynistic, overtly racist, overtly anti-Semitic direction. So that's one of the foremost challenges, I think, for someone like me who has kind of been doing some substantive work and now seeing it get hijacked. It's all frankly a bit of a mess, to put it
Right.
mildly. Now, back to your question. So, look, I first met JD Vance probably six-ish years ago. In fact, at the very first NatCon conference, as you call it, the very first National Conservative Conference in Washington, D.C. in 2019. We've stayed in touch. I actually, back when I first joined Carlo Newsweek as opinion editor, and I actually published at least one op-ed, maybe two, by JD Vance back in 2021, around the time that he was running for Senate in Ohio. I personally remember editing that op-ed and emailing with JD about it. We've spoken at many of the same conferences over the years. We were on American Moments Advisory Board together. So we've overlapped quite a bit. In fact, I was actually a very early booster of his vice presidential candidacy. I wrote my syndicated column back in March 2024. So that would have been 4 months prior to Trump picking JD. I titled that column that week, Vice President JD Vance. And I was kind of early on this train, so to speak. I
Hmm.
think I think the question now, almost 2 years, or at least more than a year and a half after I wrote that column, is, has the case for JD changed at all? Has he changed at all with the way that he has interacted with other people there? And certainly when it comes to his closeness to Tucker Carlson, that is an area of immense concern. Certainly for me personally, I think for a lot of other good faith Americans of all religious stripes and all stripes in general. There, JD is definitely on the nationalist end of the spectrum. I think there is no doubt about that. He is clearly closer to the Tucker wing, so to speak, than the Shapiro wing, if we're going to use this kind of
Okay. Yeah.
somewhat
Right.
reductive simplification there. But having said that, there are shades of gray, I guess, between these two extremes. And one of the things that I think I'm trying to work through right now is what exactly does JD think about some of these hot debates at this exact moment? That's what I'm trying to piece together.
So you mentioned in your in your piece this week, which we'll link to, it ran in hot air, that JD Vance, when he was on stage at the Turning Point USA conference, America Fest in Phoenix a couple weeks ago, he made this point that he didn't come up there with a list of conservatives to deplatform because, quote, Charlie invited us all here and, quote, believed each of us, all of us, had something worth saying, end quote. Basically, he was saying, like, I'm not here to cancel other people on the right. Eh, but you made the point, which I thought was very astute, which is that nobody is calling for the cancellation of at least nobody on the right is calling for, like, the cancellation of somebody like Nick Fuentes, right? I think everybody more or less now is of the understanding that you can't it doesn't really work in this era of how media and how the internet works now. Like, you can't deplatform somebody. It doesn't they will if they have they will always have a platform, right? People will always be free in this media ecosystem to say what they want to say. So I think isn't that a little bit of a red herring, right? It's not about who the movement is deplatforming or platforming, but it's who they're choosing to bring in to lead and to influence them. Am I wrong?
No, I think red herring is actually the exact term that I use in the column, if memory serves me,
Right.
which is that these are two fundamentally different things. I mean, on the one hand, look, I'm a veteran of the big tech, Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg wars. You mentioned in your intro that I'm a lawyer by training. I've debated these big tech censorship issues at the nation's leading law schools. I have
Sure.
published God knows how many columns and essays talking about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, of antitrust regulation, of common carrier regulation, all the various other legal doctrinal minutia. I'm intimately familiar here, trust me, with the debate over big tech and censorship, the First Amendment, how it ties in there, et cetera, et cetera. But to your point, when folks like Ben or myself, I've been vociferously critical of people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, when we criticize them, we're not saying, "Oh, hey, Rumble, you're a free speech absolutist platform." We're not saying, "Hey, Rumble, you should take this guy off your website." We're
Right.
not saying, "Hey, you Elon Musk, you should take this guy off of X." rightly or wrongly, that ship has indeed, for the overwhelming part, sailed. And to be
Okay.
clear, I mean, if there is a private platform, whether it's Google's YouTube or elsewhere, if there's some platform that wants to enforce some sort of standard, that is their right. But what I don't think is necessarily my job or anyone else's job is to say that you have a moral obligation to do this, because oftentimes you're right. It's kind of the old Streisand effect, right? I mean, this goes back to a very
Exactly.
long
Yeah.
time. This psychological effect of trying to censor deep platforms. So that's really not what we're saying. It's a free country. You can try to monetize your stuff however you want to try to monetize your stuff, no matter how much flaming garbage is coming out of your mouth. It's a totally separate question as to how the leaders of the American right, the leaders of the conservative movement, define what it even means to be on the right. And they do that by their invitations to do things such as appear on shows, to speak at
Right.
conferences, to be a member of an organization. There's all sorts of various ways that you can signal and cue who is part of the coalition and who is not. And Turning Point USA is, at this point, one of the most formidable organizations on the American right. And their decisions as to who to speak do matter. And right now, for the past couple of conferences, so for instance, back in July, their last conference I spoke at, I debated Dave Smith at it, actually, on the question of U.S. foreign policy, and Tucker spoke at that conference as well. So for a couple of conferences now, they've been trying to do this. We're a Big Ten thing. We're willing to hear all sides thing. But that's ultimately somewhat untenable in my estimation. There's going to have to be some greater attempt made at trying to police what is and is not part of the right. And Tucker in particular, on a seemingly daily basis, Carlo, he is basically just spitting on the grave of Charlie Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA. You mentioned Nick Fuentes. I mean, Tucker hosted Charlie's lifelong arch nemesis, Nick Fuentes,
Right.
on his show a month and a half.
In a softball of all softball interviews, right?
Absolute puff softball interview. Just his past speech, or his past conference out in Phoenix, Arizona, Tucker condemned Republicans, conservatives, for engaging in Islamophobia. Now, look, people can quibble about that particular concept, but one person who would not have been happy to hear those remarks is Charlie Kirk himself, who spent
Right.
large swaths of the last year or two of his life warning about what he perceived as the incompatibility of radical Islam and American constitutionalism. So there has to be a greater attempt by the movement's leaders to ensure that we are not handing over this entire edifice, this whole movement, to a group of hyper-conspiratorial crazies. Now, from where I sit, I don't think that that's going to happen. I still think that this wing is fairly small and that their influence is oftentimes overperceived and overstated there. But it's something that I am personally very much on guard for. I think that other folks are on guard for at this point as well.
So you teed up my next question, which was about Tucker Carlson, because so I remember this guy. I've been in this business for a long time. I remember, he was sort of this classical conservative. He wore a bow tie, right? He supported Bush, supported the Iraq War. Then he sort of pivoted to become, a MAGA Trump guy on Fox. Now he's independent. And I mean, I think we would both agree the man has completely gone off the deep end. And you mentioned this, one of his latest sort of shticks is taking this very soft approach to Islamic fundamentalism. So he said recently, I assume you saw this, but I think it was on a podcast. He said that he didn't know of any Americans who were killed by radical Islam in the last 24 years. Okay, well, I mean, putting aside that if you expand that to 25 years, there's many, many thousands whose grave I happen to be standing on right now. It's also just not true, right? I mean, I can think off the top of my head, right? The Pulse nightclub shooting
Yep.
was carried out by an Islamic fundamentalist. The Boston bombers, marathon bombers, the shooting in San Bernardino. There was I don't even think anybody remembers this, but there was a box truck here in New York City that was driven by an Islamic fundamentalist a few years ago, killed 10 people or so.
Bourbon
So
Street
what?
less New Year's Eve.
Yeah, there you go. That wasn't even a year ago.
The Fort Hood massacre. There's many examples.
Right. So what is he? What exactly is he up to?
Well, look, Carl, I was actually talking about this a little bit literally on my show, the Josh Hammer show today. So look, there's various theories as to what exactly is happening with Tucker Carlson in particular, and to me, he has now solidified himself. Among other things, I think that he's the single most dangerous anti-Semite in the entire history of the United States. That is right. That is my actual, honest to God stance. I've said that many times, and I will reiterate it for as long as I have to, unless and until, God willing, he changes his mind and changes his ways there. But he's also at this point a threat not just to American Jews. I mean, frankly, he's not just a threat to the American right. I mean, when you're saying things like whitewashing the deaths of of Islamic fundamentalism on American soil, you're arguably a threat to the American republic, to the American
Mm.
citizenry here. So, I mean, how you can possibly get to the point where you're saying these things. I mean, you genuinely have lost your mind. Like there's actually some screws loose there, which is possible, frankly. I mean, if you look at Tucker's antics, the way that he kind of just comports himself there, it's very different than the very polished professional Tucker Carlson that was on cable news for many years. So maybe it's something happening that we're not aware of. He did say a year and a half ago that he fought with demons and he woke up in bed one morning with demon
Right.
scratches. So I mean, maybe I'm not saying there's demons, but
You don't have demon fights in the middle of the night, Varesh?
not to my knowledge, but I'm open to the possibility.
Right.
Um, look, I think the best guess as to what is happening here is twofold. One, I have unfortunately arrived at the conclusion that Tucker Carlson genuinely is an old school 1950s country club style anti-Semite. And I've talked with other conservatives who have known him for 20 years, and numerous of them actually have some anecdotes of him kind of slipping in moments of Freudian candor back in the day and kind of laying this cat out of the bag. I won't bore you with the details, but I've heard similar stories of this from 20 years ago. And sure enough, if you actually look on his Fox News show, it's really the one topic that never came up, right? Jews, Israel, anything like that there. And he actually ends up platforming a lot of folks with a very troubling record on these matters. So Jackson Hinkle, for instance, this absolute nut job, this psychopath who has millions of followers, some young punk little kid who talks about sign me up to fight for Hezbollah, sign me up to go to Tehran to
Right.
fight for the Ayatollah. I mean, he got his first cable news platform on Tucker Carlson's show.
I remember this, yeah.
Similarly, Max Blumenthal, who's long a darling of the very, very far left, but he's a profoundly kind of anti-Israel, anti-American, anti-Western guy. He also got his first Fox News platform on Tucker Carlson's show. So the tea leaves were kind of there, and I think that post Fox News, he's felt really emboldened to kind of let the mask drop and just say it as he really feels deep down. That's the worst case scenario. Unfortunately, I think it's the case. Now, there's also some troubling anecdotal stuff going on when it comes to the country of Qatar. So, for instance, earlier this year, the Washington Examiner, which is a conservative Beltway publication, they had an investigative article that found that there was this small mom and pop shop in Northern Virginia called Lumen 8 Advisors LLC, run by a man and his wife. They were getting paid almost $200,000. I think it was $188,000 a month by the Embassy of Qatar to engage in PR, right? And on their FARA registration form, the Foreign Agent Registration Act registration form, they listed one client that they were serving the Embassy of Qatar on their official government paperwork. That one client was the Tucker Carlson show. In other words, that when Tucker first interviewed the Emir of Qatar earlier this year, that was a bought and paid for interview. He actually just flew over to
Right.
Qatar a few weeks ago to go to the Doha Forum, where he had a second interview with the Emir of Qatar, and said that he's going to buy real estate in Qatar.
I
So
saw that, right.
I mean, I don't have the bank wire transfers to show that he's getting injected with cash from Qatar, but there is strong anecdotal evidence at this point to suggest that there's something particularly shady going on with that infamously Islamism funding very wealthy emirate as well.
Interesting. I think with people like him and probably Candace Owens, one of the other things that I think happens when you become sort of an independent, pundit is you suffer from a sense of like audience capture, right? Because it's like if you start going out on a limb on something, it's like, okay, and then the audience starts eating it up. It's like, okay, well then now you have an audience of conspiracy theorists and they want more. They want more. So like, can you don't have the sort of like institutional, leeway that I think somebody like you or me for that matter have of being like, no, my job is to sort of, work within the realm of facts here, right? With, inject opinion and analysis and all that, but the sky is still blue. Anyway, that's just sort of I feel like that's an underappreciated sort of part of why you see some of these people who have their own platforms just kind of, just go off the deep end, right? Josh, okay, I want to pivot a minute, and we're at the end of I think everyone would agree, a momentous year in American politics. Trump came back in. It's hard to believe that was not even a year ago that Trump was inaugurated. This year feels like it took about 10 minutes, but also 10 years, right? So he came back in, guns blazing. Vance becomes the heir apparent almost overnight, just by virtue of him being the vice president. Then you have the death of Charlie Kirk in September. you have the fracturing of these coalitions, not just on the right, but the left, obviously it has its own problems at the moment too. It's a little bit less interesting to me just because the left doesn't really have much power at the moment. But anyway, we're not leaving the left off the hook here of having its own sort of internal battles. But I'm curious what your biggest takeaway of the year was, and what you see as some of the big storylines heading into 2026 and the midterms, which are now less than a year away.
Yeah, there's a lot of storylines. So look, I mean, the midterms to me, Carlo, my whole shtick on my show has been that Jimmy Carville, frankly, had it right. That it's still the economy stupid. That if
Right.
you look, if you look at all the exit polls from the off year elections in early November, Mamdani in New York City, Virginia, New Jersey, statewide elections there, virtually all of them tell the leading exit pollsters that affordability, cost of living, inflation, these are all the top issues there. So is that going to continue to be a big issue? Well, it probably will be for the foreseeable future. And that leads to something of a paradox, which is we actually just got the latest Q3 2025 GDP data, and the economy grew 4.3%, which is actually quite good.
Incredible.
Yeah,
It's very good.
it's very, very good. So there's something of a disconnect between the top line numbers when it comes to GDP and the fact that 65 to 70% of Americans still tell pollsters, based on another poll I saw from American Research Group, they still tell pollsters that they're in a worse household financial situation now than they were a year ago. So
Mm.
what exactly is this disconnect? That's easier said than done. Part of it is psychological. Part of it, actually, though, is genuinely economic. So the challenge for the White House, the challenge for the Republican allies in Congress, for the Republican state legislatures, the big governors, DeSantis, Abbott, Bill Lee in Tennessee, et cetera, the challenge is how to craft policy to translate these top level macroeconomic indicators into real life policy there. And that's going to take some at times very micro, kind of small local and state level stuff. Something that I've called for my show, just for example, comes to actually housing construction. The cost of housing is probably the number one thing that I think a lot of Americans are really feeling the pinch right now. So when it comes to deregulation, when it comes to trying to minimize costs of various assessments there, these are the kind of things. There's not a whole lot that the feds can do on that. It's mostly a state, local level issue there.
Right.
But these are the kind of things that I think a concerted kind of right of center, let's call it red state effort, I think would need to do in order to kind of stave off what at this point looks like possible frustration of the ballot box come November 2026. There are plenty of other storylines as well, of course. There's foreign policy. We just saw Trump meet with Zelensky there. Trump has orchestrated a shocking number of peace deals and ceasefires in the first year of his presidency. Russia-Ukraine is definitely the biggest one that has not yet come to fruition there. Is that going to be possible? They've tried really, really hard, to their tremendous credit. It just hasn't quite happened yet there. I don't really know, to be honest with you. It's basically impossible to make a prediction. I don't know exactly what
Right.
that's going to look like, but to me, that's the big foreign policy thing that I think a lot of Americans are looking out most for, as well as what is going to be the resolution of this kind of resurgence of the early 19th century Monroe Doctrine, right? The Monroe Doctrine was this notion that America has a real concerted interest in defending our hemisphere,
Right.
the Americas.
Hemispheric dominance, right?
Exactly, against foreign intrusion, which back then meant Europe, now can mean China, can mean anyone there. And this is kind of the doctrinal rationale that's behind a lot of these Pete Hegseth-led narco-terrorist strikes there. In fact, in the recent national security strategy document that the administration released, they actually referred to the Trump corollary, which is kind of a play on the Roosevelt corollary, which itself was a play on the Monroe Doctrine. So they're laying the intellectual foundation for this there. Exactly how that cashes out legally and in practice, I think is somewhat of an open question, especially when it gets down to Venezuela itself. Is Maduro going to survive there? So these are some of the foreign issues that I'm definitely paying close attention to. As a lawyer, I always pay attention to the Supreme Court. Certainly, there's plenty of major cases pending at the Supreme Court. The two biggest ones that I'm looking are, one, there's a structural constitutionalism case when it comes to the constitutional standing of so-called independent agencies. There was a precedent from 1935 called Humphrey's Executor, which essentially bestowed constitutional legitimacy on the FTC, the FCC, and various other quote-unquote independent agencies. It seems to me that there are 5 or 6 justices ready to overturn that precedent, or at least deal a pretty heavy blow against it. We'll see.
This is Slaughter v. Trump, right? That's
exactly right.
The case.
Exactly right.
Right,
Exactly right. Yeah. And then the other kind of more culture war case I think a lot of folks are paying attention to is the birthright citizenship case. Which, if I had to make an objective prediction, I do not think is going to cash out the way the most conservatives hope it does. Unfortunately, from my vantage point, I've actually been very outspoken on this issue for over a decade now. But I don't currently see the votes there for the outcome that I think most conservatives want.
You think it'll go, what, 5-4, that we're going to keep it in place?
Uh,
Something like that?
I think could be even more lopsided than that, actually. I think that
Interesting.
I think that there are likely two solid votes for Trump's view when it comes to Clarence Thomas, Sam Alito. I think any additional vote than that is a mild stretch. I could potentially see three, maybe four, but honestly, I would not be shocked
Right.
if it's 7-2.
And then tariffs. We're also waiting on the
Right.
decision on the big tariffs case, which I guess could come any day now. Actually, before I want to stay with something that you just talked about, which is sort of foreign policy, because one of the things that I'm sort of having a hard time like trying to understand. I did on the show a couple of weeks ago. I debated myself on the idea of going to war in Venezuela, because I mean, to me, I think any sort of military action there, to me, seems insane. But I sort of understand the geopolitical, machinations in place. But I guess my question to you is, how do you if Trump came in saying no new wars, America first, we are not doing battle overseas for oil, for anything else. And now he's, in addition to, bombing these boats off the coast of Venezuela, now blockading Venezuelan oil, it certainly seems like we're prepared for a military intervention in Venezuela. We've also got he struck Nigeria, ISIS cells in Nigeria on Christmas Day. So you've got sort of this like humanitarian, Samantha Power-esque doctrine.
Yep.
He's almost abiding by there. How does that jive with the broader sort of like America first, movement?
Yeah, great question. So, I'll take Nigeria first. So I actually was also talking about that on my show today as well. So, look, the Nigeria thing is fascinating because you're right. This is not necessarily a strategic national interest move.
Right.
This very much does, to your credit, seem like Samantha Power, responsibility to protect Gaddafi, Libya, 2011 style intervention. I think if I had to guess, and I'm not sourcing this, it's just my reading of the situation. There was a speech a few months or maybe a month ago or so where Donald Trump warned Boko Haram, warned ISIS, warned the Nigerian leaders very clearly, stop this, or else we're going to protect the Christians there. And I think that he is thinking of himself somewhat viscerally as a defender of Christendom, as a defender of Western
Trump, that is.
civilization.
Right.
Yeah, Trump. So, something along those lines. Now, admittedly, it's a very different rationale than kind of the hard-headed, sober nationalist realism that I and many others have often promoted over the past 10, 15 years, whatnot there. But it more or less fits into this, Western hemispheric dominance, defending Christian civilization mentality, which is definitely behind a lot of Donald Trump's supporters. So it's not a perfect reconciliation. There's definitely still some tensions there.
Yeah, right.
But that's the best that I can do of possibly reconciling that. And I mean, look, I mean, Tucker Carlson's histrionics notwithstanding, don't discount the sheer number of Republican voters who just love hitting Islamic fundamentalist radicals. I mean, that's still
Right.
that's still a fundamentally popular thing in the eyes of the Republican Party's voting base. It just is. As far as Venezuela, I did not have the one on my bingo card. To be honest with you, I definitely did not see this months-long standoff really anywhere in the offing whatsoever. So two things can be true at once. On the one hand, it's definitely true that Trump's foreign policy doctrine is heavily inclined against extended military intervention. It's certainly inclined against U.S. imposed regime change, right? Because there's such a thing as tactical strikes. That's kind of the strike on Iran back at June. There's a difference between tactical precision strikes versus regime change. On the other,
Isn't he trying to get Maduro out? Isn't that the end game here?
Correct. But on the other hand, what I was going to say was it should be self-evident. It should be obvious that if you are a nation state, there are some regimes that you like. You think that their actions bolster your national interests. And then there are some regimes that you don't like. You think that there are some that hinder your national interests there.
Right.
We could take a very obvious dichotomy in the Indo-Pacific. China, under Xi Jinping, undermines America's interests in virtually every way. Japan, on the other hand, when they are emboldened, in my opinion at least, I think Japan is a good ally. I think that when Japan acts
Of
to
course.
defend itself against China, they're a very good ally of the United States. So that's just a very clear example, right? That doesn't mean that they want to impose regime change in China, but we might kind of toughen sanctions, tariffs. There's all sorts of various other tools of economic and diplomatic statecraft to try to twist the rulers there, try to turn the screws. That's more or less how I read the situation in Venezuela. I do think that the Trump administration clearly strongly prefers that Maduro not be in power. It's far from obvious to me that they are actually willing to send the 101st Airborne parachuting into
Right.
Caracas to actually topple him. This is a very aggressive campaign. Again, it's frankly, it's far more aggressive than I think I or any others would have anticipated. I've defended the legal rationale of the narco-terror strikes and Article 2 constitutional grounds, but the the whole sprawling thing, the seizing of the tankers, the blockade, it's pretty intense. I think it's coming from this doctrinal standpoint of trying to reassert the Monroe Doctrine, trying to go for real kind of Western hemispheric dominance there. But it is more aggressive than I think we thought it would be. At the same time, as I said, I don't think it'll actually get to the point of troops on the ground because that certainly is not what Trump's voters voted for either.
Yeah. It just seems to me he's almost, I mean, I guess the risk, and he is nothing if not a risk taker, is that he paints himself into this box where either he has to back down or Maduro does, and it's like this game of chicken. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. I think that this obviously will be one of the big foreign policy stories playing out in the new year. Back to this year, who in your estimation, sort of taking another turn here, were the biggest political winners and losers on the right? So I'll give you mine for the left. I think the biggest winner of the left this year, I think, is a no-brainer, Zoran Mamdani. I think the biggest loser, Andrew Cuomo. I mean, I don't know how much closely you follow New York politics, but Andrew Cuomo put on one of the most pathetic, campaigns for mayor here of anything I've ever seen. I mean, it was just it looked like he just didn't want to be there, and Mamdani wiped the floor with him. So I think those are my takes for the winners and losers on the left. Give me your winners and losers of the right.
Sure. So my winner is probably Marco Rubio. I think that Marco Rubio has done.
That was going to be mine.
I think that he's been nothing short of exceptional. I think that he is absolutely crushing it in this role. He's a total natural for it. I live in Florida. Rubio kind of came to political prominence here in Florida. It's been well known for a long time that Rubio cares a tremendous amount about foreign policy. He cares about America's relations with the rest of the world there. I think that he was coveting Secretary of State, frankly, from a very early political age. And he's been phenomenal. I mean, the way that he articulates his points, the various leadership that he has exuded, his doctrines, I think that he's frankly surpassed my expectations. And if he decides to run in 2028, I think that he'll be a very formidable candidate. Look, the loser on the right. I mean, look, it's hard not to go back to Charlie. I mean, you mentioned Charlie. Charlie was a friend of mine. Carlo, when I first took over the opinion editor reins of Newsweek, Charlie was one of the conservative columnists that I inherited, actually.
Yeah.
That's actually how I first got to know him, got to know Andrew Colvett, his executive producer and so forth
Yeah.
there.
He wrote a bunch for us.
Oh, yeah. Charlie has a prolific byline for Newsweek. I
Mhm.
personally edited many of those columns, in the early days of my own tenure at Newsweek. I'm not going to say that the loser is my friend who got assassinated, but I will say that the loser, more collectively, I think, are conservative or conservative curious college students who lost probably their single greatest champion, kind of going from campus to campus, trying to challenge prevailing orthodoxies there. It's somewhat of an open question as to what exactly the Turning Point USA college campus apparatus looks like going forward. But Charlie was very much one of a kind in terms of his not just being well read, but his willingness to engage in genuine good faith
Right.
debates. And that's a very, very, very difficult thing to actually spend the time, like real time, debating one-on-one students there in upbeat, amicable fashion. That's a really, really rare thing. And the tragedy, of course, that our culture could use a heck of a lot more, not less than that, but a lot more of it.
No, I completely agree. And when he was killed, I remember, I had a very visceral reaction. I think everybody did, really. No matter what your politics are, it was just such a horrific moment in this country's history. But I had a very visceral reaction, and I wrote in the newsletter that week and did some videos that week about how, like, because I have a lot of liberal readers and viewers, and I was trying to make the point to them that you may not have agreed with this guy, right? You may have even found him deplorable or whatever word you want to use, but you're not going to like what fills the void without him, right? To your point, like, he was out there pounding the pavement, talking to people and having good faith debates. And people like Nick Fuentes aren't doing that, right? They're broadcasting from their parents' basement and being anti-Semites and racists out in the open. And I think any political movement needs somebody like Charlie Kirk who is out there fighting the good fight for their people, right?
Amen.
Yeah. Okay, good answer on the winners and losers. I completely agree with Rubio. He's one thing that he does really well is he's able to he doesn't get he doesn't let himself get in the mix with like the daily this Trump scandal or like
Right.
outrage of the day. Like I mean, I guess part of that is just by virtue of him being Secretary of State, but he does a very good job of sort of floating above it. So still being, obviously a core member of Trump's inner circle and, fighting for his boss, but he doesn't come across as a partisan the way that I think that somebody like Vance does. Anyway, I just agree. And I think that he's been, even though I don't agree with much of his politics, I think he's been extremely effective. Okay, jumping forward, 2028, which is coming sooner than we think it is, believe it or not. As a conservative, I want to ask you who you most and least want to see leading the Democratic ticket in 2028.
It's not a question I've given a whole lot of thought to be very honest with you. That's kind of my honest answer, just because it is so long
Sure.
away. And to be honest with you, Carlo, these days I find myself oftentimes more preoccupied with trying to clean up my own side of the debate than with worrying about with who Democrats will nominate 3 years from now. But look, having said that, I think Gavin Newsom is probably the most formidable. I don't think he's been a particularly good governor in California. I mean, he's overseen the first population egress in California since California was admitted as a state. All sorts of other data that I could spit off there. But Gavin Newsom is extremely well spoken. He's extremely articulate. He's literally out of Hollywood central casting for being
Oh
president of
yeah.
the United States. I mean, he looks the part, he talks the part there. He's the leader of the largest state in the country. The fundraisers, the donors would get behind him there. I think that he's definitely a formidable candidate. By the way, so is Josh Shapiro. I mean, if Democrats can get over their their own Jewish problem, right? I guess both sides have something of a
Yeah.
Jewish problem these days. But Josh Shapiro obviously comes from a swing state, Pennsylvania. There, someone who is clearly smart, clearly well spoken as well. Has a more moderate track record, I guess, than Newsom. Is he a moderate? I don't know. I guess regional minds can vary, but he's definitely more moderate, more centrist than Newsom. But really, Pennsylvania. I mean, Pennsylvania is at this point in American politics, I would argue, is probably the single most important swing state in the whole country. And
Totally.
having the governor of that state be your nominee is really, really, really something that I think Republicans would frankly be quite fearful of. As far as who I least fear, look, I mean, one of these like young kind of far left types, right? I mean, like, AOC, Jasmine Crockett, someone like that, would not make me sweat particularly much.
Right.
Having said that, it's not out of the realm of possibility that someone like that could be our next president. I mean, if things really go south. I mean, to be clear, I'm not predicting that. I'm not saying that they will. But if God forbid there's like a terrible recession, there's war with China. I mean, who the heck knows? I mean, the point is,
Right.
it's just so long away that it's not out of the realm of possibility that someone like that could actually win. But as a general rule, those are the kind of Democrats who scare me the least.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think so. I have sort of a similar take on. So I think Newsom would be a very bad general election candidate for the reasons you mentioned. Just have the millstone of running the most dysfunctional state in the country is a big one, right? That he would have to carry with him. And I love California, but I mean, I don't think anybody would disagree that it's a hot mess. Shapiro, it's hard for me to imagine him making it through a primary for the reasons that you noted, but I think he would probably crush anybody in a general election. I mean, again, who knows? It's still early, but again, he's got 70% approval rating, something like that, in a very purple, important swing state. Another one of his problems is that he has virtually no support among the Black community, at least not yet,
Mm.
and it's going to be very hard to win a Democratic primary without the support of Black voters. You mentioned him a little while ago, but I know you're a Florida resident. Talk to me about Ron DeSantis, because I realize he's term limited now, and he's a lame duck, and so he sort of like loses a bit of his mojo just by virtue of that. But he really hasn't been out there as much as I sort of thought he would over the last year. He's staking out this very interesting anti-AI position, the
Yep.
sort of like populist anti-AI position that I think is very smart. He's intuiting, I think, a backlash that is brewing that we've been talking about here on the show for a while. Do you think he runs in 2028? What's his game plan?
So first of all, let me just say that I'm an unambiguous fan of Ron DeSantis. In fact, he's one of the big reasons that I moved to Florida and still live here. I've
Yep.
met him a number of times. I publicly support his presidential campaign, his obviously very ill-fated campaign, but I think
Smart guy.
he's whip smart. I mean, he does the reading. I mean, he does not rely on his staffers to like read him the briefs.
Yeah.
He really engages. I mean, during COVID, folks could certainly disagree with his conclusions, but he was literally the one reading these medical studies, like footnote for footnote. I mean, he was doing that like in like
Right.
the wee hours of the morning. I mean, like this, he is sharp and he knows what he's doing. Again, whether you agree with it or not,
Sure.
this man
Agree.
fundamentally knows his vision and knows his worldview. Is Ron going to give it another shot in 2028? I really have no idea. It's not something that I've ever kind of discussed with him or his inner political circle there. Obviously, his bid did not go particularly well the last time around. Look, I mean, DeSantis has shattered Florida records when it comes to statewide margins of victories. I mean, won by almost 20 points in 2022. That clearly did not translate to the national level. He was not particularly effective or charismatic on the debate stage. He let Trump in various ways belittle him from his true social feed as opposed to being on the debate stage itself there. I think it's possible that he gives it another shot in 2028. Probably not if Marco Rubio runs. There's simply just not enough room for two high-profile Floridians with a similar-ish brand of
Mm,
politics. I just don't see that uh, happening. I think Rubio basically has the right of first refusal at this point there as to the lead
sure.
challenger to JD Vance. If someone's going to challenge JD, I think that Rubio is probably people expect him to be the logical person to do it. If Rubio decides to pass on that, then it's possible that DeSantis gets in. The rumors are certainly swirling that Ted Cruz might get in as well. I'm not
I've
sure.
heard that too.
I'm not sure that's going to be effective. I say that I've known Ted for a very long time. I actually ghost wrote his book in 2020, so I wish him nothing the best. I'm not sure that's going to be a particularly effective thing for the next step of his career there. But I think that DeSantis, if I had to guess, there is basically in wait and see in 2028, according to what Marco Rubio first decides. If I were advising Ron DeSantis, what I would personally tell him to do after he's term limited come January 2027 is I would say, dude, just go cash out. Get some private equity, fancy high paying C-suite thing. Before
Right.
DeSantis wrote his book, which is on my bookcase behind me. So the book came out before he launched the presidential bid. So the book came out, I guess, was February 2023, if memory serves. There, the book like quadrupled his net worth, but prior to that, his net worth was shockingly modest for someone of his age. It was
I remember
literally
reading that. Right. Yeah.
it was literally like less than 400,000 for the 40-something-year-old governor of Florida. Again, that's changed because of the book. But if I were encouraging him, I would literally say, you've been in politics for a long time, go earn some money.
Go get paid, baby.
Go get paid. I mean, there's really nothing wrong with that. I mean, at least for a few years, mull your options, see how it plays out there. But again, if Ruby decides to pass there, I think it's not inconceivable that DeSantis gets
Yeah.
in.
DeSantis is young too. I mean, he's
Yep,
what, 50-ish? So yeah,
less
he's
than that.
got,
Yeah.
yeah. So he's got time. Although I guess you could say, you either have time or you don't, right? Chris Christie is the great example. Like he waited too long and then he lost his moment. Before we go, I do want to ask you about a story that's been in the news a lot here at the end of the year, which is this massive sort of years-long scheme of Medicaid fraud that has been committed by members of the Somali diaspora in Minneapolis. The story has really blown open recently, partially due to some really good reporting done by Chris Rufo at the Manhattan Institute. There's been some conservative influencers who have gone to Minneapolis and stirred some outrage with their reporting. But this is not one, again, I was writing in the newsletter today, like this is Democrats need to pay attention to this story. This is one of those, the way that it works, and this just as I do working in this business is, a story like this gets the right wing media gets its hooks in it. So the dominant mainstream media reflexively believes it to be a non-story because the right is fixated on it. This happens the other way too, right? But I think this is one of the big, problems in our sort of like media ecosystem is that, you can't just look at a story as like this should be an outrage to all Americans, right? These aren't even allegations. I mean, people have been convicted. They've pled guilty to bilking, federal taxpayers for money that in some cases has reportedly gone to Al-Shabaab, the Sunni Islamic group that runs part of Somalia. Even putting that aside, just the fact that millions, potentially billions of taxpayer dollars were funneled into these fraudulent Medicaid services, daycare centers, et cetera. This is it's a big deal, right? And I think that you know liberals need to pay attention to this stuff because if you're going to be for a generous welfare state, you have to crack down like crazy. You have to be merciless about prosecuting things like welfare fraud because if you don't, normie voters, people who aren't, totally in on the left or the right, they just look at it and they say, well, why do I want a bigger social safety net if my tax dollars are just going to be stolen? right? I mean, what do you
Yeah.
what's your take on the story?
Yeah, no, I've been hitting this story very hard for months now. Basically since Chris Rufo broke it. I mean, Chris does amazing work, by the way. You mentioned him.
Yeah,
We published an op-ed or two by Chris. I think, but even before he joined MI, this would have been probably in COVID era, Black Lives Matter 2020. But Chris is an amazing activist and really did amazing work, kind of generating the story there. So Carl, as you're speaking, I was pulling up this tweet from Cash Patel over the weekend. And he was talking about just one element of this story. So the story has a lot of moving parts there, but just this one particular element, the Feeding Our Future network fraud, which is part of this healthcare fraud. This one case per the FBI led to 78 indictments and 57 convictions. So it's a pretty high, as a lawyer, it's a pretty high conviction rate
right,
based on the indictments there. So there are a lot of people that have been found by courts of law to be very guilty. And
right,
you mentioned billions of dollars. I saw a tweet just earlier today. Someone kind of snarkily pointed out that the apparent billions of dollars that have been defrauded by Minnesotans is actually a greater number, for whatever it's worth. It might not be worth anything, but it's a greater number than the loss that Lehman Brothers reported in 2008 that triggered the entire financial recession.
right,
So it kind of puts into
right.
context that this is not
Yeah,
not a small amount of money we're
this is
talking.
real money. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I
Um,
mean, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
I would say, I mean, to me, one of my questions is what did Tim Waltz, Keith Ellison, any other power brokers there in Minnesota, Flanagan, the lieutenant governor. I mean, what did they know? When did they know it? And Scott Besson, the Treasury Secretary, is currently investigating some of this. We'll see if it leads to possible indictments, prosecutions of their own. There. Another very interesting question is, what did Kamala Harris's vetting team know? When did they know it? Because Tim Waltz is kind of plucked out of relative-ish obscurity to be the running mate
Right.
for Kamala Harris. I mean, one of two things.
And this has been
So
going on for years. This didn't just
correct.
happen like yesterday, right?
Exactly right. So one of two things is true. On the one hand, maybe Kamala Harris's vetting team just totally missed this, which is bad. On the other hand, maybe she saw it and they said it's not a big deal, which is probably even worse. So I think that there are very relevant questions, especially as Kamala, molds a possible 2028 comeback tour. I think these are some very relevant questions that people should be asking as well.
I'm surprised Kamala Harris wasn't your answer for Democrat who least keeps you up at night in 2028.
She's a very fine answer to that question, to be clear. Very good answer.
Yeah. And I think she is going to run. It certainly seems like it, which, God, it's crazy to me. But okay, I want to do a quick lightning round before we go. So I'm going to, if this is cool with you, I'm going to name off some members of Donald Trump's cabinet. And I want you to just tell me the first words or phrases that pop into your head. I think, we can have a larger discussion. I think that, I'm not a Trump supporter, but I think that he's got some people in there who are obviously very smart. People like Marco Rubio. I think he's got a lot of slackers. I think he's got a lot of people who are not doing work that is helping him or helping the country. But I'm curious your thoughts. So, are you ready for the lightning round?
Yes.
JD Vance,
Uh, strategizing,
Marco Rubio,
ascendant,
Scott Bessent,
competent,
Pam Bondi,
uh, also competent. A lot of conservatives really bashing Pam Bondi. I'm not part of that. I think she's done a good job, actually.
okay, Pete Hegseth,
Uh, sleek,
okay, and final, Kristi Noem.
effective. That's actually I this is probably something that you and I don't agree on, maybe. But for what my money is worth, actually, the number one thing that the administration has accomplished in this first year that I think they should be proudest of is the fact that southern border illegal crossings have decreased by over 90%.
Oh, I agree with you on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they've virtually gone away, which is extraordinarily impressive, to be honest with you. And I think that Chrissy Noem, Tom Homan, the whole team deserves a lot of credit for that, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't give them the credit for that personally, but I would give Trump the credit for it. I mean, I
Sure.
do believe that is something that he deserves an inordinate amount because the whole thing was for years we were told like, look, the border is porous. There's not really anything you can do about it short of like massive comprehensive immigration reform, which is never going to happen. So like it is what it is. And it turns out that like that's not actually true. Like Trump actually was able to, just by virtue of his
Exactly.
sheer personality, come in and say, no, it's done. The border's closed. Now his interior enforcement, that's another ball of wax. We'll save that for a for another day. But my thanks to Josh Hammer. Thanks a lot, Josh. I really appreciate you coming on, man.
I appreciate it, Carlo. Thank you.
And again, you can watch Josh Hammer or listen to Josh Hammer on his syndicated radio show, as well as his podcast, which is on our YouTube page right here where you're watching this one.